Carlton King, former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually majors in on geopolitics. This week, we're looking at part 2 of the programme I started last week. Blacks have been doing that forever and a day beforehand. And you can go on and on and on. Your Frank Sinatra, they had to give something to the great Duke Ellington, a little bit of something, but not too much. So what you find is throughout the ages, blacks had always been pushed to the side in the music game. So to call something black music actually limits it. And I think that's where we were. You opened that up. That's what I'm seeing with you. You saw the game, said to them, actually, you can make money in this game. If you miss out, somebody else is going to make it. And I guess these guys, particularly at one stage, saw that. So can you talk to me a little bit about that in the licensing?
I'm going to make my point first because it's relevant, okay? It's not even playing the game. It's playing the system. I, as a lowly intern, I always had this dream. I mean, one thing I'd say to your listeners is I did actually have I did have a tiny little imprint. I had a little indie label. It's called Poppy Records. You can check it out. I love the tunes, but they're fairly primitive. But they were just all my mates' bands. They were just, I'd go out and make music with my mates' bands because half the time I could sort of put it through other people's systems and whatever. Let's not talk about that. My point though, right, is that as a lowly intern, when you sit out there and you've got desk dreams and you look at how the system works, right? I would. Me and all my mates who had other lowly intern roles in the music industry, right? We'd always have this dream about charting. It was one of those things, like we had this dream about charting a record that never existed. Because back in those days, you could have done it. It was so easy, right? But essentially, the chart was controlled by where you were on the Radio 1 playlist. Where you were on the hour price scale out, i.e., back in those days, reps used to take CDs, physical products, out to all the hour price stores. They'd play them the track, or they'd just tell them the hype about the track, right? So whatever. But because the reps were expected to go out early with it, Radio 1 was expected to hype it early, and then the chart position sort of depended on it, right? So there was so much gold dust to be made by the fact that all of these systems had flaws in them, that you could just jump in. So we had this whole plan, like back in the day. I mean, God, we were 18, 19, right? And we had this whole plan about how to chart a record that never existed. And then I worked for a subsidiary of BMG, who had a metal band, not like a well-known metal band if you're into metal, but it would never have charted, right? Mm-hmm. And they used to sell a lot of albums to Germany because metal was quite big in Germany.
Very big. I used to live there.
Yeah, it obviously still is, right? So this particular metal band, instead of doing a licensing deal with the German version of BMG, they said, no, we're going to sell you physical products, right? Which was common, commonplace, right? We're going to do it on an import and export deal. What it actually means is to the German buyer, to the German customer, it's more expensive, right? But but if they want it, and if something's a niche thing, then so be it. You probably make more money, right? Now, so what they did was they put 100,000 records on a lorry, right, to out of the warehouse to go to Germany of this particular metal band's album, and obviously, and back in those days, what that meant was once it's gone out of the warehouse, it's considered to be a sale. So in the old days, when the chart position was checked against the laser log, that laser log could see how many units had been sold.
100,000 units.
Sold. So 100,000 units being sold to Germany, right? Then, brilliantly, the lorry catches fire on the autobahn. Right, so the label MD,
by accident.
So the label MD, right? Instead of the first thing he does after he's dealt with the lorry situation, right? First thing he does, calls the warehouse, orders another 100,000 units,
Don't tell me
gets them out on another lorry. Second thing he does, calls William Hill, says, "What are the odds of this band being in the top 10 next week for album sales?" Right,
insider trading.
And they said, "Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you can imagine, this was a pretty unheard of band, right? Mm-hmm. Outside of Germany, obviously, right? But because anything that was exported, even if it was returned, even if it was sale or return, because it was exported back in those days, it counted as a sale, right? Mm-hmm. So right, let's just say, so for argument's sake, they'd already sold 200,000 units, right? Mm. Right, so he calls up William Hill and says, right, what are the odds of this unheard of band? William Hill had to call him back with the odds, gave him back massive odds. He basically invested pretty much every penny BMG had at the time on that deal, and now he's retired.
Well, you see,
he lives in Guildford and he's got some ducks.
In finances in the city, that's insider trading. So it's
insider trading. Of course, it's insider trading.
So it's interesting that see, I never knew that. So this is where we are. This is what the show does. It educates people. And I want Morgan to tell people what licensing is about soon, because this is what it does. It educates people. Because all I was doing, I was working as a DJ in Germany, and I was getting from the gear market, as they call it, which is the licensing people. They were sending me records to play because I was in one of the best discos in town. And I was making, your money. I was making that 50 times, let's argue, right? The money that you guys are talking at your end. So I was doing okay at the game. But what I wasn't getting, and I guess I was getting that because I'm a black guy, it's an advantageous now because I'm playing this sort of music. I'm a black guy playing it in a land that, yes, there are black Germans, of course, but fewer and far between than in the United Kingdom, who's speaking their lingo and passing their music to them. So they like that. So it's kind of it kind of played to my advantage in that time. What I never thought of doing was what you did, Morgan, and taking that step further, jumping away from just playing the music and making the money out of the music. So I want to hear that story of how you did that.
If I can say this, and you will have a whole lot of people go sigh and go, no, it was about the money. It never was, and that's the problem. If it was about the money, I'll be living in a mansion and I'll be having a colonial lifestyle. Sorry for that pun. It never was. It was the passion. I mean, going one step back. So my days at Pi and talking about black music not having the respect or the marketing or the promotions, the reason was there was no marketing budget. I had no marketing budget. I had to use the clubs. I had to use the streets to actually break the music. And then going one step forward with imagination and R&B, I kind of used the system, marketed the group as mainstream, even though it did break in the clubs. And then
sorry, Morgan, I don't want to stop your flow, but I think people want to know this. What's the difference between you as the promoter and the manager? Because it sounds to me as though you made as though you actually made Imagination rather than the manager. So can you explain that a little bit as well?
Well, I was kind of everything. So I was managing director of R&B Records. I was the A&R director. If you look at the back of the album sleeves, I was the A&R director. I was a creative person. I was in the studio doing the mix when they did Body Talk. I worked with two very talented producers, writers, musicians, Swain and Jolly, who went on to produce and write for Spandau Ballet. Gold and all was done by Swain and Jolly. So I went in to these two gentlemen working at Red Bus Studios who were doing library music, effectively library music, brought my expertise, of course, the talent of Lee, John, which was let's not beat around the bush. He was the mainstay talent of Imagination. Mm-hmm. So we had his input as an artist. The song was co-written. We went in the studio. I had the musician expertise of Swain and Jolly, the arrangements, and we created this track Body Talk, which sounded like nothing ever from America track. Or the UK. You know, dum, 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 dum. Used to play it. Or, the second you hear that first bass note, you kind of know it. So I was effectively manager. I was the record label. I was the creative director. So you asked the question between manager and promoter. The manager decides the longevity, the forward planning of a band. The promoter takes the vision of the manager and the artist, because to me, I always listen to what the artist wants. The first question I ask any artist is, what the fuck do you want? Where are you trying to go? What are you trying to achieve? Here's where it goes wrong. When you try to market or you try to manufacture, i.e. PWL Sound and many groups where they're manufactured boy bands, it's never authentic. I took what's on the street. And if again, jumping, this is why the relevance of hip hop and electro is so important. It came from the streets. Yes. Fuck's sake, it came from street corners.
Exactly. I mean, like people always cite the whole. I mean, I worked for Pete Waterman for a little bit, but people always cite the whole Rick Astley, like, you know, debacle about, you know, oh God, you know, we had Never Gonna Give You Up and like right. But at the end of the day, like he was really. So people are like, oh, you know, there's lots of narrative about how, oh, maybe they should have just gotten a person of colour to record that song, and maybe they should. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but Rick Astley was in a soul band for years. I mean, that was his like teenage dream to be in a soul band.
And there was Blue Eyed Soul, you know, your Paul Youngs, whatever. No, I get that. But remember, if you were head of a company, where do you spend your dollars? Exactly. Marketing a white person or marketing a black person? This was not the dilemma. This was a fact of the industry. What the Street Sound albums did, and, you know, to quote Michael, paraphrase wrongly, Street Sounds democratized street music. So by taking these artists that were unknown, that were happening in the tri-state area of New York, and, you know, the Imagination story I was replicating in the UK, by taking these artists and giving them kind of exposure and showing people this music was mainstream. This music was vibrant, passionate, was from the street, was true, was authentic. What the Street Sounds album did was open up. Try and imagine a Street Sounds album at Spotify. Great analogy. I actually just thinking about that.
Cheaper,
we know what Spotify is. Much cheaper. But imagine how you now listen to playlists on Spotify, iTunes, whatever. We had these albums that came out at the height of our albums, 2 or 3 a month on different genres, the electro, hip hop, the mainstream, anthems, we had the jazz juice, rare grooves. It encompassed all the different peripherals of black music. And they came out, people could not listen to it on radio. Radio was deaf to black music. You had your Greg Edwards, you had your Mike Shafts in Manchester, that's about it. That's about it. You had a few people who were mavericks, incredibly essential people in the history of black music in the UK who need to be recognized, but they're not recognized, because what cancel culture is doing is leaving that first 10 years period, jumping forward to your Tim Westwoods of this world who say, you know, this guy created fucking hip hop, this other person. I'm not picking on Tim. I'm just saying this cancel culture is trying to rewrite who were the ambassadors, who were the mavericks, who were the people who put their necks on their line. And despite what the radio stations wanted or dictated, they said, I'm going to do it my way, so to speak. And what the Street Sounds albums did was bring that music. pure, authentic from the streets, and give it to the masses, the kids then who are now grown up, who are in their 12s, 13s, 14s. They could go into their HMV, our price, for £5, buy the latest collection. What was the slogan? The 60 minutes of the greatest dance hits, whatever the slogan was, the street sounds. You could buy this album, hear what was happening on the streets of New York City, wherever. It could be in LA, in New York. I just use that coin of phrase. And you could get this album, you could home tape it. We found on average, when I did a survey way back in the mid 80s, late 80s, we found, even though we shipped, I'm looking at my wall right now, we shipped over 60,000 units of Electro One. 60,000. I mean, Adele, artists today, eat your heart out. I mean, this is 60,000, but we didn't actually do 60,000. The reality was it was close to 1 million, because the average person who bought the album duplicated it, copied it,
and also
4 or 5 times.
In the early days of Serato, right? In the early days of Serato, when you could just upload everything, right? I mean, I know I wasn't actually joking when I know we spoke about this before, but I wasn't actually joking about when I used to DJ. I would put one of your compilations on if I needed to go to the bathroom, because I knew that even if because whatever quality track I'd put on, I knew it would be followed by another quality track if there was a queue in the bathroom. Because ladies' bathrooms are a different situation to men's bathrooms in clubs. Let's just face it.
Let me ask you that. How did you choose what went on their album?
Sorry?
How did you choose what went on the album? Because you were doing that, weren't you?
I was doing that. I was A&R and curating all the albums. With one exception, the Jazz Juice albums, I relied very much on Giles Peterson, because he's, to me, one of the greatest aficionados of the jazz music side. But I curated A&R the albums, hip hop, electro, the mainstream, most of the albums. Oh, by the way, again, you mentioned something in the conversation that when you started, most of your friends were white. You were the only black person, so to speak, the only black person in the industry. I was reversed. So when I started, all I was dealing with were black artists, black managers, black musicians. And I can honestly say with a hand on my heart, most of my friends to date are black, gay, Latino, whatever, because that was always has been my music style. It's bizarre. But I was never at the start. Carlton, try and imagine, I come into the industry. I'm Indian. There are no Indians in the industry. I am going to New York. I'm trying to license this material. They look at me and thinking, you can relate to the white Jewish man running the major record label. You can relate to that, because that was the industry. Like the film industry, Warner's and the Fox, they were owned and controlled by a particular sector, particular demographic of audience. And I'm not going to start saying white, Jew, whatever, because I have 1,000 people saying I'm a racist and that. And anyone who dares Carlton, if anyone dares say it to me, fuck off. I am the most liberal, open-minded people. And here's something I want to talk about. You can't say anything because of political correctness. I'll say what I want to say, but I have my hand on my heart, knowing I embrace all religions, cultures, and creeds. But you can't. I just say this because you can't say anything these days without somebody taking those 2 or 3 words and saying, Morgan said that the film industry was owned by white Jews. He's anti-Semitic. Fuck you. Fuck you say that. I am not. I embrace everything. I'm just making a factual point. I'm not going to rewrite history like you guys want to do. There we go. That was my little political political rant for a few moments from now. Sorry, Carlton.
It's okay. Have you out, my friend. We're open here.
Carlton, everywhere I go.
You know what?
It's like everywhere I go now, before someone says something, they say, "Excuse me, I don't mean to offend. I hope I'm not offending." Why is that now always the prelim before a sentence wherever you go? Why is that?
Very true. Very true. Very true.
No. I was about to say we actually love this level of authenticity, and this is what makes the show the show. And maybe we edit the audio, we can have like Dougie Fresh the show. Like when I say this is the show, we could have like no, but it's these all incredibly authentic opinions from people that matter.
Well, it's lived experience
that makes through lived experience exactly that make our podcast what it is, and that's why we're so proud of it.
So on this one, my friend,
So never apologise, never explain.
because this is going superbly.
Carlton doesn't. I started off by saying I am so worried about our nation, but it's reflective in something. I'm so worried about the music industry. Doesn't music reflect on the people and the dumbed downness and the TikTok mentality, the 5 seconds of attentive span of most young people these days, the bedroom DJs who haven't gone through the school of musicianship, school of artistic development. These people are effectively writing, producing, and leading up the music industry. Now, doesn't this mirror parallel society? If we are accepting this dumbing down, music has no value, by the way. And that's another big problem. People perceive it's a right, God-given right. You can turn on YouTube, put on Spotify. It's there. It's free. There is no value. The fact that artists need to be paid, need remuneration, the writers, the artists, the people behind, the producers behind the records. This is symbolic of where we are now. Everything is dumbed down. Everything we look at
this is what I wanted to
is
ask
dumbed
you.
down.
When you were speaking, this is the point that I was just going to make. I noticed you said to me that you had 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. Were you tailoring your albums to, in fact, educate the youth up into this type of music? Or was that just a semblance of what happened? Was that just what
a semblance what happened? Never ever and try to educate, always entertain. I wanted to reflect what was happening on the street. I wanted to give exposure to this music, which I could not believe. It was alive, it was fresh, it was unique, it was everything about this music. I, the punter, always as a punter, not as a record company executive or owner, I loved and I wanted to give it exposure. And the fact that, yes, Electro 1, Electro 2, and many of my albums went silver, gold in terms of sales, that's the buy and buy. It's wonderful. All of a sudden, your distributor saying, hey, Morgan, you've done X hundreds of thousands in this particular month. That was a byproduct, but we never anticipated that. What that showed me, though, was one amazing point. You didn't need radio. You didn't need establishment. You didn't need the BBC, because this was happening organically on the street. And a lot of these, they're all grown up now. They're captains of their industry. They own companies or they're employees. My audience, the people who listen to my radio station, the station I'm associated with, which was created called Street Sounds Radio, which we call the soundtrack to your lives. It is a soundtrack. You put on Street Sounds, and it's a DeLorean. It takes you back to the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, the very best, because music was curated, music was developed. Artists had a sense of, I don't know, call it what do you want? Musicianship, expertise to actually create this music. Yes, it came from the streets. Yes, the beats were raw, but there was something pure and authentic. And because of technology, because of the accessibility, first you mentioned your children are making music. First rule, work with them. Get them expert advice. If they want to be musicians, producers, let them work with people. I'm not saying now particularly, but let them hone their skill, not just become another generation of bedroom DJs, musicians, artists, which we're hearing right now. And we're accepting it. The masses are accepting this music. Why? Look at the music that we grew up with. Look at the musicality of the music. Look at the groups. How do you reference them? How do you reference your Public Enemies, Run DMCs, Earth, Wind and Fires? How do you reference them with groups today? You tell me a comparable group, 2023, that lives up, that has that richness, authenticity, creativity, immense feel, wall of sound, uniqueness that we grew up with. We were so fortunate in the 80s. We had the new waves, we had punk, we had romantics, we had hip hop. Walking down the street in London in the 80s, you saw these movements all coexisting, no internal fighting, but they were unique. There was this energy. Where is this now?
Exactly.
Where is it?
Exactly. And then, also, indie and goth and
of course, yes,
and all of those other things that and what I think is fascinating about my children is when you give them free access to all the music in the world, they don't drill down to what's playing on Radio 1 at the moment. To be honest, I don't even identify with any kind of.
But you can't. But what we can't say is, and I do want to say this here, is that some of the new stuff isn't good, because some of it is good. So we do need to be egalitarian.
We are being egalitarian, right? But what we're saying is, what I'm saying is that, and I think what Morgan's saying is that there's when the system became a sausage machine, I suppose, for producing sounds that that were perfect for radio, it became an industry that meant that the sort of things that you would hear on Radio 1. I mean, there was a diktat from Radio 1 in the 90s where when they went to digital, they wanted to make sure, because their digital bandwidth was sort of 2% or something, and they wanted to make sure that everyone who was on that bandwidth could recognise that it was Radio 1. Mm-hmm. So they had this whole sort of 29% programmability policy, which basically meant that it fed back to the production, so all the records that were made at the time. I was working on Garbage. Do you remember that band Garbage in the 90s? Yes. I was in their press office at the time, right? And they had to remaster quite a lot of their tracks to make them fit in with the 29% programmability, because what Radio 1 was basically saying was their bandwidth was X to X, and everything had to be in X to X, so that the diktat that sort of fed back was that 29% of Radio 1 listeners would recognise that it was Radio 1 if they were switching between the slightly wide bandwidth as they went to digital.
But has that not always happened? Well, I mean, what I'm kind of saying is, if you go back into the past, you can see that radio stations have dictated what happens. Because right, I'm going to chuck something in here that I know that Morgan knows that. I don't know if you know or don't know, but back in the day when records were produced to true stereo. Mm-hmm. You could have pulled one speaker out and you only get the sound from one speaker. Yeah, absolutely. True.
And the other, right? Right. So at the point of mastering / remastering, right, there's a lot of Morgan's tracks that were produced probably in true stereo.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't relating it to that. No, absolutely.
So in the 90s, so in the 90s, there were a lot of those tracks that Radio 1 just turned around and said, well, we're not going to play because we can't play them.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't relating to that. What I was relating to was the diktat of the system. So example, we went back to the early days, didn't we, of music made by black people. That was race music in the United States and was only played on a handful of stations. So therefore, you couldn't get that music played. So that's what I'm saying, that the stations have always had this sort of power to be able to, en masse, just say that ain't being played. So that's what I was relating it to. Sorry about that. Not the actual mechanics of the process. Morgan, I just want you to explain where it all went wrong, in your opinion, for you personally. Why it didn't stick in the end.
It didn't work at the end, not because it didn't work. As a matter of fact, it was the success that was overwhelming, because I increased our staff multifold. I also did something which I learned is always a mistake for businessmen. I launched a magazine. Yeah. It wasn't my core business, and I pumped a lot of the good money, surplus money that was supposed to be for the record label into the magazine. Now, it was called the street scene. Now, I'm proud of the street scene because what we achieved in a very short period of time was circulation figures that were up there with Record Mirror, Echoes, Blues and Soul. Mm-hmm. But it didn't succeed for one reason. Here we go again. And this is not paranoia, reality. And I hope people, your listeners, have realized I'm happy to be open. I am the most, I believe, objective person. I can, as I say, look at myself and say I'm balding, I have a big nose, big belly, and I can say this. It failed because not the kids and the public didn't want it. They wanted it. Our circulation figures were amazing. We got zero advertising because the record companies were so jealous to actually advertise. They thought it was a vehicle to promote street sounds, where it wasn't. I mean, if anyone can get hold of a copy of the Street Scene magazine, we were the first lifestyle magazine. We, again, a concept way ahead of its time, 15 years ahead of its time. We had articles of 5-star, what they like to wear, fashion, clothes, not just about their time in the studio, who produced them, what keyboards they used. We gave a lifestyle magazine that had an insert with the facts. With the facts inside. So we actually had this magazine that was years ahead, maybe the way our record company was, that saw that the world was turning towards. They wanted to know what 5-star ate for breakfast. They wanted to know what Janet Jackson, her favorite shoes were. We did all this, but it was years ahead of what has now become the norm. And we didn't get the advertising. I pumped in a lot of money, and that was unfortunately the demise of, let's call it the first, the rise, the fall, and before the rise again of the Street Sounds empire. I admit it. Mistakes were made.
How did you deal with that? How did you deal with that issue?
Very difficult, because even though I was at the helm, I was the managing director, the magazine was my paper, I knew it failed for all the wrong reasons. I had not to name any for legal reasons, I had some people on board the magazine who raped what Street Sounds did. I mean, let me give you a little story, one little story, which is typical of the magazine. And I didn't have because of my time, because of what I was doing with the record side, management side. Remember, I was also developing and putting out our own record, not just licensing. We had a huge roster of artists. We pioneered a lot on the hip hop, electro, street scene by our own artists. I couldn't manage everything. So we had people, example, on the magazine side, they would hire a car, they would end up in some club, find someone, fuck them, spend the night there. The cab would be outside, and that bill for that particular cab, this is now that currency, not now, would be £200. Maybe now £1,500, £1,800. This was almost endemic amongst some of the people of the magazine. The bills, because they used,
like Morgan, I had to but even in record labels, there are so many record label bosses that I will not name that I had to book those cabs for. So I know that this is completely a fact. And also I had to call their coke dealers, and also I had to call their dry cleaners in the morning, and also I had to call their wives and make some excuses. So this is not
I get it, but there's one huge point. That's a major label, and it's wrong. It's immoral. It's wrong, but it's done. I did a lot in my Pi days. I had an expense account. I just sometimes on my expense account put in 15. This is then maybe comparable now, £5,000 for hamburgers. It wasn't for hamburgers. We know where the money went, because I handled these major artists who came in the country, and I was their artist liaison. I was in charge of them, and I had to give them what they effectively wanted. So I kind of get that. But this is my money. This is my company. I brought these people on board as family. I brought these people on board and trusted implicitly in their integrity, and they effectively fucked the project up, because all they thought was me, myself, now let's take what we can. I've got to fly to the States. I've got to go do this. I've got to go do that. And we couldn't. We weren't a major publisher. We were not a major publisher.
So why were you not able to, if you will, police that process?
I just didn't.
Why did you not have people looking at it?
I didn't, because the people I had in charge were looking at it, and they were the main protagonists. They were the main people, and I'm not giving an excuse. You have to sometimes trust some people. Yeah. I have trusted all my life people. I've always said, until someone fucks with me, I have 1,000 examples. An A&R man I brought on board, or a promotion person, and I realized the hundreds of cassettes are coming in each week, because Morgan Khan is the only label to go to understand street music. They were listening to them, filtering the best and giving me the worst to try and create their own label. I've had 1,000 things in my life I can tell you the story about, 1,000 stories about that, but it doesn't diminish my hope that humans are effectively good people. And I always will treat everybody with a fresh canvas, respect them, trust them, until they fuck on my parade, so to speak. So I should have policed it. I take full responsibility. But
I'm going to say,
but the Phoenix did rise, and I learned a lot.
I'm going to say, and I'm speaking for Carlton as well. I'm going to say let's have you back on as a guest, because I think that we've touched on so many things.
Well, we haven't hit on much of what's gone on.
We haven't hit on
we need to have you back.
So we need to have you back, right? So let's have you back.
Oh God, no! You mean I can't speak about the EU being a homogenous zoning club? I can't speak to you about
Well, you can on
the next show.
About our government.
What we're saying. What we're saying, my love, is that these are all gold dust, and we want to expand on them properly. So what we're suggesting is that we have you back, and that we talk out some of these topics as episode length features.
Now, for listeners listening, this will obviously be part 2, because I'm looking at the timings. I didn't want to stop Morgan. He's gone on superbly, and I think it's fantastic. So I didn't want to lose anything. So this will be part 2 of what we will have done last week, which will obviously have been part 1. I mean, there's a logic there. So this is a 2-parter. We're going to have Morgan back at some stage, because I think we can work together, Morgan. You're a sympathetic fellow to me. I think we can work together on many issues.
And what
likewise. And part 2 will be the contentious, will be the liable, will be the extreme. Not because I want to be dramatic, because there's lots to talk about, and I would appreciate and thank you for inviting me back.
I'm gonna make this even more seamless for listeners. What would be fantastic, because obviously we've touched on so many points here, what would be amazing is if listeners could either comment on the podcast in whatever way they listen to the podcast, or
Morgan, shut the fuck up.
My LinkedIn, as all the listeners know, as all the listeners to the podcast know, like the easiest way to get me is on LinkedIn. So if you would like Morgan to talk about something, or if there's a question, or if there's a point, or if you'd even just like to share your favourite Street Sounds tune or something, or an experience of a club situation or whatever, hey, I mean, I'm actually thinking maybe we could have a little virtual club night at some point. I mean, maybe I'm thinking pie in the sky, but
maybe you are, but we'll see.
That would be cool. We've opened a new studio for the radio station, Street Sounds Radio. We had the visual studio was in Southend, but now we've opened a studio at the Orbit in Stratford. So maybe something down in Stratford, or it could be one again to talk about in part 2. Street Sounds, as you were, has launched a range of beers, electro beers. Again, from the street, there's gonna be a hip hop beer, there's electro beer, there's gonna be a jazz juice beer. There's so many things I'd like to discuss and talk about. And can I do one little plug?
Absolutely,
if people do want to find out more, please. I've created a new portal, which is kind of in construction, but will be ready in the next 24 hours or so, called streetsoundsglobal.com. streetsoundsglobal.com. And don't think I've sold out. It's nothing to do with global, because you think we're Microsoft or we're Apple. It's kind of a portal where you can see what the Street Sound different brands are doing. There's a Street Sounds Academy that's launching this year. We did a test case last year. It was a major success. This is actually academy for underprivileged or special needs kids or people who just want to be in the industry in terms of presenting or DJing, but haven't got the opportunity. Yes, there's a wonderful facilities like the Brit schools, whatever. I think we're different, because I will look at a different sector of the population who will have access to experts. I'll have the incredible experts teaching, helping, developing these people. So the portal will be kind of the streetsoundsglobal.com. It's like a portal to the academy, to the Street Sounds Music's record site, of course, Street Sounds Beer, Street Sounds Radio. And do download the Street Sounds Radio app from Google or the Apple Store, because when you turn it on, you will smile. And if you don't smile, I'll buy you.
You don't want them.
If you don't smile, right? Okay, so I'm not lying. I have a few Street Sounds albums. I mean, obviously, like my home office is wired to the internet now, so I don't actually need to play the vinyl, but I do have the vinyl. In the mornings, sometimes in PR, when you need to hit news desks, news desks like go to conference at 8 a.m. in the morning, right? So you need to basically hit them from like 6 till 8 in the morning. And so sometimes you need to have your coffee and just need that, right? So sometimes I play like Hold It Now, Hit It. Like,
so you hit the old street sounds.
but the Beastie Boys Hold It Now, Hit It is like it's like my sort of, okay, I've got my groove back on, I can do this. Like I can sell in I can sell in a friend.
But
Morgan,
Carlton, are you listening to Street Sounds Radio? Because
I'm not.
it is the music of our youth.
Morgan, hold the line for me. Don't come off the line. I'm going to say thank you to the guys and gals, ladies and gentlemen, all those listeners. And by the way, subscribe, as I say always. Fergus, thank you very much again. And I know you're going to tell the listeners to subscribe. Morgan, can I have your last words? But stay on the line afterwards, because I'm going to talk to you subsequently after the show. So, Fergus? My
last words, guys, are just think about the song that means the most to you. Think like I know our listeners are of all generations, but this is what I say to my children every day. I say, think about the song that defines today. Think about a song that means the most to you today.
Super. Morgan, what can I ask you to say on your very last thing if I come back to you, obviously, later on?
Well, firstly, I would like to thank both of you for giving me the opportunity to be here on this podcast. Thank you. I am humbled because I never expected way back when I started that I would be the source of information, and I look towards others who are my mentors. So thank you for giving me the time and opportunity. And we are in a most unbelievable flux right now. Technology is not the solution for everything. In fighting, getting involved in wars that are that are not ours.
Correct.
This whole movement where it's them and us. America, you can see it in America, the Democrats, the Republicans. It's a nation that's at war. Everything bar civil war there is, but we have it here too. We have it here, and it's not being helped by governments who ignore the needs of the people. It's not helped by schools who are being dialed down. The infrastructure is crumbling. Everything around us is being held together almost on a prayer, a whim, and promises. And I believe it can change. I believe it can change, as many things can change if there's a will of the people to say, I've had enough. I'm mad as hell, ain't going to take it no more, so to speak. And it is a cliche, and I'd love to expand what I mean on part
on
two.
the next show. Absolutely.
But I would like to thank everybody for allowing me, because it wouldn't have happened if Street Sounds wasn't as important, hasn't developed into the legacy brand that it is kind of right now. I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to do what I absolutely love to do. I mean,
and like, let's just say, because obviously we've all finished tonight with a record. We've all finished tonight with a record. Let's just say we could play out this podcast with a hypothetical record, right? Like, how would you be playing out this podcast? What tune would you be choosing to play out this podcast? And I'm going to choose my husband first.
I'll be choosing Rapper's Delight for sure. That's it.
Morgan?
Every moment, even while asking me the question, I flick through my memory of maybe 50,000 tunes. And I'm serious. Look what I've worked with, not only on Street Sounds, but the music I love. I'm
pick one, because I'm going to say Whistle Just Bugging.
Okay, pick one. Fight the Power. Public Enemy.
Great song, Public Enemy. I chose one of yours. If I was going to probably choose one that wasn't yours, I'd be looking at something from Marvin Gaye's catalog.
I thought it'd be too egotistic to choose one of mine. So
yeah. So as you haven't, I'm going to jump in with Marvin Gaye, and I'm going to say, what's happening, brothers? So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully you will listen again next week.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, And don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
More than a quarter of a century, I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.